Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Searching for Truth. This week I am talking about domestic abuse with the lovely Claire Marie Kelly. And as with the first 2 podcasts, this episode is going to be exploring some of my own truths. I experienced domestic violence a long time ago, but in some ways, because it was so long ago, I kind of knew that there were probably going to be some hidden truths in this area that I've quite conveniently buried for obvious reasons. So you'll find out a little bit about me, but my guest this week is Claire Marie. This is Searching for Truth on Domestic Abuse. Okay, so we are recording. So hello, Claire Marie.
Hi, Donna.
So we've known each other for not that long, actually, but I feel like I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, we only met in February.
Yeah, you are someone that we've already talked about. We need to make sure that we kind of home in a little bit on this, because the reason why I feel I know you for a long time, or I do know you, is because we've talked for England, haven't we, over WhatsApp?
Yeah, I think we're definitely both fall into the talkers category.
Indeed. And I remember before I really knew you very well, you were just a part of the entertainment company that we both work for. And I'd put out a question back last year asking if anybody would like to help me fill in a survey. Anyone who's experienced negative emotions in the past or still affected by negative emotions in the past. And I was amazed at the response I got. And I think I got to know quite a lot about your story, of which some of which you're going to share today in your responses to that. So thank you for that, because actually a part of that survey and that research has kind of led me to what I'm doing now with these podcasts. So thank you for your input in that.
Of course, yeah, I was happy to help, but you know, that is part of my past, and if it can help other people who may be dealing with similar in any way, I am more than happy to share that.
Yeah. So in this podcast, we're talking about domestic abuse, domestic violence. It's something that I have experienced and thankfully gotten out of the way at quite an early age. And I always remember feeling quite soon afterwards feeling grateful for that, and because I really did know that I wasn't going back there again. I had an inner strength, but we'll talk about that as we go on through this podcast, because there was something for me that was really quite poignant that gave me that strength, and so I really did know I wasn't going back. So I've always felt quite relieved that I got it out of the way, because obviously some women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s are going through domestic violence, and men. We shouldn't dismiss men as well. So will you share with the listeners and myself a bit of background behind your story? How old were you, how young were you when you first experienced domestic abuse?
I would have been as young as, I was very young. I'd have been about 3 years old is my first memory of domestic violence in my home. And it was actually towards my mum, who had just given birth to my sister. She'd had a cesarean section, and she hadn't cleaned up or done something, and my dad hit her so hard that she fell over holding the baby, and my sister would have only been 6 months old, and it continued after that. I remember my sister wouldn't stop crying, and she was still baby, little baby, and he picked her up by one foot and threw her across the room into a sofa. I was often locked in my room because I would argue back with him. I didn't honestly. I've been a little fighter since I was since I was young. I would stand in between him and my mum, which was probably very dangerous for me, to be fair. At that age, I just didn't see it that way. And I would shout back at him, and he would just pick me up and throw me into my bedroom, and he'd slam the door, and the door handle was too high for me to reach. He was a very nasty piece of work. He'd get drunk. He would constantly abuse my mum financially. She once had to ring her brother and ask him to buy a pack of nappies. And at the time we lived in Lincolnshire, and my uncle lived in West Yorkshire. So that's a good 2.5 hours away, and it was before internet transfers and bank transfers could just happen at the touch of a finger. So he had to drive all the way from West Yorkshire down, because my mum had said, I can't afford any nappies. Can you come down? Please help me. So he came down, and he said, well, I'll stay over the night, because obviously it's a long drive. So he came down, gave my mum the money for the nappies. And then my dad had invited him to the pub, and my dad pulled out 250 quid straight out of his pocket to pay for beer, and bought the entire pub around beer, but wouldn't give my mum any money for nappies, because he'd already given her £30, and she should have been able to make that last the entire week, buying the food, gas, electric, pay all the bills, TV license, everything out of that £30, and it was just ridiculous. And so she was struggling, and he lied to her and said he had no money, and actually he had enough for his beer. And it was lots of different abuse. You know, I used to hear verbal abuse all the time. So I just thought that was normal. That's how you spoke to people. You know, that's how it was. You know, women were trash, and it was fine to say that, and it was fine to call people nasty names, and swear and shout and hit them. And
how old were you, Claire Marie, when all this was going on with your dad and your sister? When your sister was born, how old were you?
I was 3 when my sister was born. It was 2.5 years, but it didn't start. I didn't really see it. I can remember from about 3.
So although you grew up, and you're right, as children we don't know any different. Unless we're going around to lots of other houses and seeing it differently, we don't know any different. But was there something in you that knew something wasn't right? Did you, obviously your connection with your mum, you must have really felt for her. What can you describe that?
I often used to see my mum cry a lot, and that just naturally used to upset me. But I didn't. It continued all the way till I was 8, when I finally turned around and told my mum to leave. It continued a long time, way longer than it should have, in my opinion. But my granny actually told my mum that she should stay, or she'd failed as a wife. That was the advice. I mean, I love my granny to pieces. She was a great granny, but that advice was a pile of crap.
Was that religion based? Was that to do with?
Yeah, she was an Irish Catholic, raised by Irish Catholic nuns, my granny, in an orphanage in Ireland. And yeah, she firmly believed that no matter what you'd said, till death do us part, so you should stay. But it was kind of rich, because my granny divorced her first husband and married my step-granddad, so I don't know where that advice came from. If I'm honest.
Yeah, that doesn't quite add up, does it?
Not really.
Oh, so that's a real troubled childhood for yourself and your sister.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult, but I always say I had a privileged childhood. Like I honestly did. My grandparents would take me away quite a lot. I would spend a lot of time on my grandparents' farm, and I would constantly be there with them. I'd go fruit picking. We had a lovely orchard which grew apples and pears and greengages and plums and gooseberries and strawberries. So I think my granny used to tell me off all the time for eating all the fruit off the trees and then not being able to eat my tea.
Oh.
And yeah, I was really shocked when people used to buy fruit in carrier bags, like in plastic wrapping. I was like, no, they come off of trees. Why would they be in a bag? It was really funny. So I was really, that side of my childhood was very privileged. So the bit with my dad wasn't, but it was, I don't really know what made me see how it was bad. I just instinctively knew that when I loved my mum, I didn't want to hurt her. So when he said he loved his family, but he was constantly hurting them, I felt that was a lie. And I just kind of knew that's not what you do to people that you love.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your mum did leave eventually. What age were you when that happened?
She was 8. I was 8. Sorry, not she was. She was definitely older than 8. I was 8, and what happened was, it must have been just after Christmas, January time, because the Christmas decorations are in the living room, and my mum had said to me, "Can you take them upstairs to the storage cupboard?" And I was only very young. Well, I was 8, you know. And Dad was watching the TV, so he was watching the football. Now the thing is, if he was watching the football and you made this much noise, you were going to get hit. That was it. You were going to get battered. So I went into the living room to pick the stuff up, and he snapped straight away, and I could see it was not great. And he just went, "What the are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, Mum's told me to put these upstairs." And he just went, "Get the outside." And so I just went outside and was playing on my bike. And then my mum came home, and I'd not put the decorations away. So she came straight out at me and said, "Why haven't you put the decorations away?" She was obviously in a bad mood. And I said, "Oh, you know, he's watching the TV. I didn't do it." So she went in and started putting the decorations away. And he'd had a few. I don't even think she made much noise, and he just snapped, you know. He saw her as a punch bag. She was nothing more than somebody who did his cleaning, did his cooking, and he beat up when he was drunk. And that's all, honestly, all he felt for her, I feel, at that time. So as soon as she walked through the door, she was done for. And so he locked the front door, because I was actually sat on the doorstep and I heard the key turn, and I thought, that's strange. Why would he lock me out of the front door when I'm sat playing in the garden? And then my mum screamed help, but he obviously hadn't remembered that the back door was open. So I ran through round the back door into the hallway, and he had a step ladder. My mum was on the steps, and he had a step ladder pressed against her throat on, like, where the step benders. Her neck was like there, and the step was like that. And he was like trying to push it down on her neck to snap her neck. So I went into the kitchen, I grabbed the biggest pan I could, I whacked him over the head. It obviously made him dizzy, enough that my mum could push him off. And my mum said, "Ring your uncle." And she'd done this thing throughout my childhood, which I had never ever, until I was older, realised what she'd done. And she'd written in the back of every single one of my colouring books my uncle's number, his house number, every single one. And I had to memorise it. And she'd say, "Come on, let's learn your numbers, blah, blah, blah," in the back of every single one of my colouring books. And so I'd memorised it. When my mum said phone, he ripped the phone out of the wall. Obviously, it was still wired back then. And he went to grab me, but he missed. I was really quick as a child. And I managed to run down the hallway, out of my back door. Somehow, adrenaline must have done it, because I was only short. I managed to jump literally over 2 fences and a ginnel between them, like 4-foot fences, burst my neighbour's door open without even asking, shouted phone. They pointed to the phone and I rang my uncle. I can't remember what happened after that, but I do know my uncle arrived. And then there was a lot of faffing and fluffing. And then my mum just said to me, we were sat on the steps and she said, where do you want to live? Do you want to live with me or your dad? And my sister, before I could even get any words out, went, I'm going to live with Claire Marie. That was it. That was it. That was my sister's mind made up. She was going to live with me. There was no doubt, no shadow, no nothing. She wouldn't pick my mum. She wouldn't pick my dad, but she picked me. And I just looked at my mum and went, obviously it's you. And that was it. We left. And she got out and she didn't look back, and she really picked herself up from that point.
Oh, good. And that act of her getting you to memorize that number, writing it in every book, that act of you, and I think the force behind you as well, just jumping over that and getting to that phone, you saved your mum's life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, I know we are talking about your story. Some people, and because I've heard people, all sorts of views on this, some people look at domestic violence and will say, well, why don't they just go? Why don't they just walk away? Why do they, you know, just, and you've shared a story whereby you've seen someone you love go through that. So a question that some people might be asking, well, how did you then get into that yourself? Me personally, I understand why it almost makes sense that you get into it because of what you've been through and what you've seen. So is there anything you can say about that, or lead up to then what happened for you personally as you got older?
Of course, yeah. To be fair, like I said, my mum stayed because she had people telling her that's what she should do. She was scared that she wouldn't make enough money. She was scared. He used to say things like, without me, you're nothing. Without me, you can't survive. Without me, you'll have no money. All these things, you know, and it goes over and over and over again in her head. And so I guess that's why she stayed. How did I fall into it? Well, when I was 11, my granny died of cancer. And like I'd mentioned, I spent a lot of time with my granny. But she used to help my mum financially, and not like too much, you know. My mum didn't need that much. She got herself a job and she sorted herself out. But, you know, when it came to Christmas and one of us wanted that little extra thing, you know, my granny would always make sure it was the good one, you know, not the cheap one. She'd make sure it was right and things like that. And or Christmas dinner, she'd be like, oh, I'll pay for Christmas dinner. If you cook it, I'll pay for it, you know. And it's those silly little things where she'd be like, well, of course I'm coming for my free Christmas dinner. And you're like, well, you pay for it. She's like, you know, I'm not cooking it, so it's free, you know. And that's those kind of things that I guess you miss.
She sounds lovely.
Support.
Yeah.
And oh, she was lovely. I wouldn't mess with her. She was pretty scary, but she was lovely as well. But it just means that it meant when she died, my mum kind of lost her entire support network. My granny was only 56 when she died as well, so she was really young.
Wow, that's too young.
To be fair, it was her own fault. She smoked about 40 a day and drank about 40 cans as well. So, you know, it was coming. She could have taken better care of herself, but she didn't. And she used to say, well, I'm happy. And that was fair enough. But it did mean that when she did die, my mum was she got really ill. You know, she became really, really ill. And it became really difficult for her. And it led to a series of negative events happening in my life, which it just spiraled. There were some really bad things that happened, I won't go into them because they're not really branching on the domestic violence side of things. They're different kind of topics. But it just meant everything was a little bit harder. But then my mum got better when I was about 14. And when she got better, when she'd had the kick up the butt she needed to get herself up and get herself ready, and when she was ready to accept that she needed help and she needed to get better, it meant that for 2 years I'd been living, well, nearly 3, I'd been living practically as a grown-up. And my mum got better at 14 and went, that's it, I'm the grown-up, you're the child. And I'd surpassed child. I wasn't quite grown up. I'd surpassed child, and I just didn't know where I was. So
it's a very awkward age as well, isn't it? For 14 for a 14-year-old is very confusing.
Yeah, it's already hard enough, but then when you've already been living as a grown-up for 2 years, then someone tells you you've got to go back to being a child.
No, that's like, not going to work.
It didn't work. It didn't work, you know, and with all the best intentions and all the love in the world, it was just a mess. Everything was a bloody mess. And my mum was trying her hardest, you know. She was a single mum when there wasn't much support for single mums. And it was just a hard time. So what happened is me and Mum got into a battle about power, who was in charge of my life, and it became quite at one point. You know, it was really, really grating. It was really kind of damaging mine and my mum's relationship as well. Now we're like best friends. She's, you know, we're great. We still like have our little tiffs like best friends do, but you know, we're actually a very strong unit now, and you know, it's really nice. We're more like friends than we are mum-daughter kind of relationship, which is beautiful. But to get out at 15, because obviously at 15 we know everything as well, you've got to remember that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So a year of arguing with my mum, and I knew more than God, because obviously at 15, every 15-year-old does. You don't need Google in your house when you've got a 15-year-old, because they know everything. But I saw my only way out was to get with a man who was 27 years old when I was 15. And basically, if I kept the house and I gave him children, he would do whatever I wanted. I could run a house and have freedom, which I'd been doing already. But this way I could go out and do whatever I wanted. That was the kind of promise, you know. Annie had a car. To a 15-year-old, that's amazing. Cars, you can't have them until you're 18. So silly 15-year-old brain kind of went, oh yeah, that's fine. And it wasn't fine. You know, that in itself was wrong. Yeah. And it was a nightmare, you know, real big nightmare.
So was he abusive to you were you living with him at 15? Were you kind of in between homes with your mum and him, or had you moved?
Oh no, he literally, we got a house of our own and we moved into that house. It was a really rubbish house. It was £30 a week rent though, so that was okay.
So you were just 15 and he was 27.
Yeah.
And you were living this life of a young adult. And yeah. So
I was pregnant at 15 with my eldest to him.
Okay. When did he start being abused? I mean, because I'm assuming you in your mind and heart then thought you loved him.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, yeah. When and I'm sure he made out to you that he did to you at first. When did the abuse start happening?
It was actually always there. I just didn't realize it. When the day I realized it was the day I rang him up and asked permission to buy a Mars bar. And what happened is I was walking to the shop and he would actually check all my receipts. And if I'd spent anything that I hadn't asked for, even if it was for my child, he would get really upset because that wasn't in the budget. And I had to stick religiously to the budget. if anything went up or down in price, I had to itemize it. It had to be exactly how much. He knew everything. What it was really quite strict, quite severe. So it was, and that's damaged me like all the way through, because it's now made it, even now sometimes I can find it really difficult to tell Chris how much something costs. My current partner, who is adorable, but he understands completely, but sometimes I really find it difficult to have a financial discussion with anybody because of that. But I was walking to the shop and I rang him up, and I was walking with another young mum who was my friend, and I said, am I okay to buy a Mars bar? And he went, and she took the phone off of me and went, she can buy a sodding Mars bar, you twat. I was just like, and she hung up on him, and I thought, ah!
Oh no. I mean,
it was, it wasn't great, because obviously I was like, but her saying that made me go, yeah, why am I ringing up about a 60p Mars bar? What am I doing? It's 60p. And that really triggered. And I then started to work out, whenever I wanted a treat, I actually rang my mum and said, I've managed to get this money or whatever. And I was sneaking little bits of money to the side and say, can you tell him that you've bought this for me? And I'd have to buy it myself, give it to my mum, and my mum would come over and give it me, because I literally felt so scared to say that I'd spent any money on me.
There's something that's come to mind as you're talking, because I do some voluntary work in a women's refuge. Well, I used to before this lockdown. And a lot of the women there, you've probably heard of the Freedom Programme. The Freedom Programme is a great program for women that are come out of domestic abuse, because a lot of women don't realise what's been happening until they step outside of themselves, if you like, into a refuge or relatives or whatever, and then they can see it because you're in it. So until your friend picked up the phone and took the phone off, you were in that. You weren't thinking about, oh, this is wrong, whatever. You were just in it. And that is what happens on a big scale with all the emotional stuff going on in the relationship.
It was, the thing is, when you're in it, it's normal. That is your normal. There is nothing else to compare to. And you always hear people saying, my normal isn't your normal. That's a big phrase used, and it's very true. But when you're in a domestic kind of violence, when the behavior is wrong, when it's not correct, when it's abusive, you still see that as normal and acceptable. And it takes that little twist, that my friend picking that phone off of me saying she can buy a Mars bar, you know, that for me was the, oh yeah, I should be allowed to spend 60p on myself. And it's where it started adding up. So that evening I actually decided I was going to say to him, why do you make me itemize my money? And I asked that question. Now, some women would have really struggled to even ask that question. But I decided I was gonna, and once I've decided something, I'm gonna do it. Quite strong that way. So even back then when I was struggling, and he said, well, it's not yours. And that was his answer. It's not your money. I thought, why? I run the house and I do this and I do that. And I didn't really understand what he was saying. But I decided, when that was his answer, that I would go get a job and I would have my own money. And so, yeah, I was like, I got a little job. It wasn't paying much. But then he would be like, you have to give me that money. I was like, no, that's my money. You told me that, that's the rule. I've now discovered in adult life that actually I have autism. So when someone tells me a rule, I stick to that rule. That is the rule that someone gives me. And I'm kind of grateful to that being one of my things, that when I'm told a rule, that's what I stick to. Because when I went to work and I earned money, that was my money, and he told me that, so that was his rule. But then when he then decided that I was being a smart ass with that, instead of me just living by the rules he'd set, I was then being smart. So it stopped just being verbal, and it stopped just being controlling and financial. It then started to become even more abusive, to the point of psychological abuse.
Which is, well, all abuse is wrong and awful. Did he hit you?
Not hit me physically with his fists, no. He has hit my child, my eldest child. He hit my eldest child. That was really...
Is that his child?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say you were 15. It can't be much older than that.
Yeah, no, it can't. Yeah, no, it's my eldest, which is his. Yeah, and that was really the final straw for me. You know, I kind of dealt with the abuse myself. He'd thrown things at me, you know, like cups, and threw a knife at me once for buying him lingerie for Christmas because I was being a kid.
For what? Sorry, for buying him laundry.
Lingerie, like
lingerie. Oh,
and apparently that's what sluts wear. So he threw a kitchen knife at me. So yeah, his level of psycho was definitely up on the scale. He also, I think this was the worst abuse that he did though, and it was very, I want to use the word, I don't really want to use this word, but it was clever. But I don't ever want to give him credit for being clever, but it was very clever. He nearly got my mum to section me. It was that bad. And he was hiding items. So I got myself a job, and at work, we would go out on payday once a month. We would go out and we'd get drunk and have a great time. And it was with people my own age. You know, I was only 19 years old at this time. And I'd already suffered so much by 19. It's quite shocking. I might have just been turning 20 actually, but yeah, it was 19, 20. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that I was going out with other people, and I was starting to see what normal actually looked like for other people, and starting to work out that things weren't right at home. And he'd started to lose control a little bit with me. You know, I wasn't, he'd be like, why is the floor not hoovered? I was like, because you haven't picked up the hoover. You know, I was like, I was starting to rebel, and he didn't like that. And he realized that I wasn't, because of the abuse I'd seen as a child, I wasn't really bothered about a bruise on the face. I wasn't bothered if a cup hit me. It actually physically didn't bother me. That was normal. To be hit, to be beaten, to hurt was normal. And I actually wasn't bothered. I had no fear really of being hit, because that's what happens. That's normal. So if you kick off, you get hit, that's fine. And that's not normal in itself, you know. But he realized that physically attacking me didn't trigger me. It didn't get me to back down. It didn't make me scared. I just went emotionless and just went, oh, okay, and walked off. And that was grating on him. So he became very psychologically abusive at this point. On my work nights out, he would hide bits of my outfit, and only until I was late and started shouting, because it was happening so constantly, I would get cross because I knew I'd left it somewhere, and he was then making out like I was insane. Like, of course you'd left it here all the time, you've just misplaced it. And it happened very regularly. So this one time, my mum was starting to believe him. I'd prepped my going out outfit. I'd put my dress hanging on the back of the door. I'd put my handbag on the handle. I'd put my shoes underneath the dress, and I'd rolled the tights up into one of the shoes. And then I left for work. After work, I would go to nursery and pick my children up and bring them straight home. And I rang my mum. She must have thought I was completely off my rocker. And I got her to come over as I was setting the outfit up. And I said, look, here's a dress. And she was like, yes, I know what a dress looks like. I was like, no, here is the dress. Here are the shoes. Here is the bag. Here is this and this and this and this. She was like, okay. And she looked really like, she was looking at me like I was completely insane at this point. I said, now you must meet me here exactly as I get back with the kids. You must be here. You must be here. You must be here. And she was like, okay, I'll be here. And I got my mum to be there exactly at 6 o'clock because I picked the kids up at 6 and then I'd be back by 6:05. So she promised she'd be there at 6, and she was there. And we got out of our cars together, and I got the key and I said, right, okay, you unlock the door. And she unlocked it, and he'd already been back because he would come in through the back door because he had work boots and stuff. And he was already back. My mum came and said, oh, hi, yeah, just thought I'd pop in. Like thinking, oh God, she's gone mental. And I says, oh yeah. And I says, oh, do you need a wee? Mum, you normally need a wee. And she looked at me really bizarre. And I says, oh, I need one as well. I'll come upstairs and we can both go at the same time. She said, all right then, yeah. She's looking at me like I was completely bonkers. And so she went, instead of going to the toilet, obviously, I took her into my bedroom. I was like, look, what's missing? She went, well, where the hell are the shoes? And I said, honestly, every time. I said, just go back downstairs and act as if nothing's happened. You've been for a wee and I'm just getting ready to go out. And she went, all right, okay. And I would normally set off at 7:30. So I'd put my kids, get them ready for bed, put them into bed at 7, set off at 5:30. And so I did all the normal stuff. And then at 7 o'clock, I started going, oh my God, my shoes are missing. Where are my shoes? My shoes have gone missing. And he sat downstairs with my mum and went, oh, every time. She never remembers where she puts them. At 7:35, when I was late, he found my shoes. He found them apparently on the kitchen chair underneath the table. That's where he found them. But my mum looked at me in that moment and just went, and I was like, and then we went outside and she said, oh, I'll give you a lift into town if you're running late now that you found your shoes, which was really kind of her because normally I'd have to get on the bus. So she got me in the car and she was like, what is going on? I was like, all those times I shout, it's because he keeps taking my stuff, hiding it, and only delivering it when I've gone mental, when I've kicked off, when I've started shouting, when I've broken, and it looks like I've gone insane to everyone around me. And my mum was just like, I can't believe that's been going on. And that's when my mum started to realise that was happening all the time.
Was that a turning point for you?
It was about a couple of weeks after I left.
I think it's as well, maybe it had something to do with the whole, sharing it. And when they say a problem is shared and aired and identified and understood, once you've your mum finding out and being able to discuss it awakens you up to it even more, even though it's been happening. Just having that kind of proof that, yeah, it's not me going mad, this really is not a good situation, I need to get out.
But it was getting to the point where he was doing this stuff regularly. Stuff would go missing all the time. I set up my own little business selling bikinis on eBay just to keep going. And a whole box of my stock went missing. But I'd used the money from the last lot to buy that, and so it went missing. So that was all my money had kind of gone, and he was doing things like that to control me. And he said, "Oh, you must have misplaced it." I was like, "What? A huge box? How do you misplace it?" And he just kept saying, "You must have misplaced it. You must have lost it. You mustn't have picked it up. You mustn't have bought this." You know, like literally all these things coming in, and I was getting very confused in myself, and starting to maybe believe that he was right and I was the one which was going insane. I was starting to believe that, and it took my mum seeing it and actually seeing it unfold in front of her for me to go, "Oh, actually no, this isn't right. I need to go."
You talked about the psychological abuse, and with my experience of domestic violence or domestic abuse, was more the psychological. So I did get hit. I got my nose broken, and that was because I was talking to friends. I was out, and I didn't even know that he was out watching me. But yeah, and I got thumped in the street, broke my nose. But until then, I used to have a little lump in my nose, and I remember the surgeon saying, "Do you want me to get rid of that for you?" I was like, yeah. It's like, where there's a cloud. But the psychological, the terror, I always used to call it being terrorized. So it was almost like the verbal terror. I was going to say terrorism then, but do you know what I mean? The terror of it, the terror of being hit was far worse than being hit yourself. So
Yeah.
having someone's hand up against you like that, like right close to your face, I would almost prefer to be hit and get it over and done with
Yeah.
than to have that. So
it's that build up.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same. If someone threatened me, I'd be more scared than the actual physical thump, because I'd get over the bruise. But it's exactly that. It's that build up. It's that walking towards you slowly and you're not knowing what they're going to do. It's that being able to physically grab you and you not being able to see an exit. I actually still now can't stand people standing in doorways. If people lean on my doorway, I actually snap at them to get out of the doorway, because it still petrifies me that I can't get to a door.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the money side. You've still got issues there with your present boyfriend, but so it's psychological, kind of goes in. It really gets in there, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
you'd have to really work on yourself to get rid of them. Whereas physically, yeah, it's still in there. It's still obviously, but you can cover up the bruise. You can put a bit of makeup on and move on and put a brave face on.
Also, people see a bruise, so people sympathize, whereas people don't see psychological abuse. So when they don't see the trauma that causes, so they see the bruise and they go, "That's wrong," and they instantly see that. Whereas it's very difficult for, say, someone's mum or brother to see that someone's been so evil, you know, and they start to tell you you're wrong, and tell you that you haven't, you know, experienced what you have. And that in itself, again, is another way that they get you, because it's invisible to the outside eye. You know, the saying, "Nobody knows what happens behind closed doors," is so true. You're never really going to know. But when I was 19 dealing with this, it was very taboo for anyone to talk about psychological abuse. You know, we've come so far in the last 11 years, really, with it, 12 years now. But 10, 12 years ago, you know, you didn't talk about psychological abuse. That was just you being a pathetic woman, you know, you were just being too sensitive or whatever. And it's those kind of things that, you know, stay. And like you said, I've got a really supportive partner now. Chris is an amazing man. But it does mean that he has to be very patient with me with stuff. You know, when we're talking about deposits on our wedding, for example, I actually really struggle to say the number out loud to him, to say, oh, it's this much money we, you know, have to pay to have our wedding of commitment together. You know, it's actually very, very difficult for me to
But
say those things.
I'm assuming he, well, I know he knows your past. You've
Yeah.
shared with him. Before we talk about that, because that is something I want to share as well, the relationships that we have now, because we've gone from there to then, and you were like myself, young when you got out. Was it 19? Was it what
Um,
did you do when you?
it'd been heading on to 20. I think I was definitely 20
Yeah.
when I finally left. I kind of got myself ready at 19 to leave, and I was already 20 when I left. Yeah.
And was it when you were that age then, did you know that that was it? You were not, were you able to almost separate from what you'd been through and just kind of know that actually that's not happening to me again? Or because some women, and I know you know what I mean by this, some women, it is a cycle, like I said earlier. It's a cycle, and that can begin from childhood, from seeing their parents go through it, to all automatically, no matter what they've been through, being attracted to the types of men that are going to abuse you, or women, because that's
I
the cycle you're in. When did you know, or was it still a little bit hit and miss that you know? Because, and the reason I say this, Claire Marie, is because talking to you over the months that I've known you, you're very open, you're very honest, and you've obviously dealt with a lot, and you bring it out. It's like why I love searching for truth, because the more that these things are talked about for me and my past, the more it's out there. It's not going to be festering inside anymore. And I get that a lot with you and your past. So I guess I just wanted to find out, when did you, well, was there a point that you knew, actually, that is not happening to me again?
Yeah. So the other thing that Phil did was he took away the right to be called Claire Marie from me. And he said I was pretentious and being a snob and blah 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 for being called Claire Marie. And he was determined I would only be called Claire. That was it. That was who I would be. And it was horrible, to the point where I would say to people, oh, you can't call me Claire Marie. That is I would say, oh yeah, my full name is Claire Marie, but you can only call me Claire. And I would say that to people. Which, if anyone knows me now, they know they'd probably get a good telling off if they called me Claire now.
when I first I think we were connecting, sometimes I'll be like, hello Claire, oh, I mean Claire Marie.
Yeah, it's one of them where I've become very strong about I am Claire Marie, and it took me a little while to get there. But what happened is, when I left, he actually refused to let me have the house that we're in and sign it over to me through the landlord here. So I got evicted and made homeless. So I was living out of a Vauxhall Saphira with 2 children and an old English sheepdog, with a backpack each. Literally, that's all I could pick up. My locks in my house had been changed. I couldn't get my stuff. I had to get the council involved to kind of get some of the stuff out, but they'd already damaged some. It was absolute nightmare. I managed to get a few photos and things, but actually it was horrific. So we had a backpack each. I had a baby Jonathan was only about 9 months old. It was, when I left, it was horrendous. James was just about to start school, so he would have been 4, turning 5 in the March. He was just about before the 6 weeks. It was in the 6-weeky kind of period, and so I was homeless, and I'd spent the night in the car. And it was definitely a spring turning summer kind of morning, you know, where there was dew everywhere, but the sunbeams were shining through. And I kind of looked up and I was like, my first thought was, oh my God, what have I just done? Oh my God, I'm homeless. I'm in a car. I should have stayed. I should have done this. I should have done that. What have I done? I've got no financial support. I've got nobody. I'm on my own. Oh my God, I've got 2 kids. Oh. And then I kind of went, no, that's enough. Shush. And I kind of quietened that kind of voice, that panic in my head. And I kind of looked round and went, but you're free. You are free. Yeah, you don't know what's happening. Yeah, you don't know where this is. You don't know what that is, but you are free. And then I thought back to my gran and me sat in the garden, and it was like a similar sunshine was coming, you know, in the garden. And she leaned into me and I leant into her and she said, do you know what the one thing nobody can steal from you in life is? And obviously I was very young and I didn't really know what that was. She said, happiness. And I thought, and she said, so if there's only one thing you can choose in life, choose to be happy. And she was right there. You know, people could control my money. People could take things from me. People could take inanimate objects away. People could be mean. They could say horrible things. All that stuff was true. You know, physical damage, psychological damage could happen, but they couldn't stop me being happy. They couldn't take away that joy inside me. And right there, I realized I'd done the right thing. I was free and I could feel that joy inside me and I wasn't going to let it go. And I just became the happy, bouncy, joyful Claire Marie that you now know. And that was definitely where I went, I am enough. I am enough.
I love that, Claire Marie, because freedom as well is something that's come up on both podcasts that I've done with guests so far. And I love the fact as well that you were able to, in the car, be able to silence all that panic in your mind, because some people don't know how to do that and can take years trying to do that and can still never do that. And I think it's associated with the amount of negative emotion that you've got stored in your body. If you haven't dealt with that, you definitely ain't going to sort this out. So for you to be able to do that in that moment, and I suppose for sometimes you've got 2 kids there, you're in a car, something's got to give, and thank God it was your
It was a panic, yeah.
and you were able to identify freedom, because that is huge. It's like, yeah, I'm in a car, I've got my kids, I've got nothing, I've got no money, but I'm free.
And that's exactly right. And at that point, I still hadn't founded myself as Claire Marie in that point. You know, that came after a lot of counselling from Women's Aid, which were fabulous. They were absolutely, the Women's Centre were amazing. They helped me so much.
Did you go into a refuge? Sorry to interrupt you there, but you mentioned Women's Aid. Obviously, you've mentioned you were in a car with your kids. Where did you go? Did you go to because I know then that women's refuges for my birth mum, because I heard about when I found out about her that she experienced domestic violence. And if I'm honest, hearing that, I think is the real reason I left. But back then, I'm showing my age, in the 70s, they didn't have these refuges. So for you, I don't think you're as old as me, but what support did you get at that? Where did you go from the car?
I actually didn't get any real support until I actually already had my own home. So I actually kind of went into this very much, I am strong enough on my own, blah, 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 sod everyone. And I kind of was crashing between friends. My mum had let the kids, obviously I kind of left, and then she was like, the kids can stay at mine, you know, sleep at mine. And I very quickly applied to the council. And because obviously the situation I was in, they very, very quickly got me a house and sorted that out. And I moved in I sorted myself out so quickly. Within a month, I'd sorted myself from being homeless to having a house of my own with 2 children, and we were decorating it. It was absolutely insane.
Do you know what? It's not insane to me to hear that, because one thing I've really realised from work, especially from working with women that have managed to get out of this, is it's actually the women that all along were the strong ones, but were put down. And this is, I say women, but I'm talking about men as well. Women and women, men. You know, I'm just
normally the abused with the strong ones, and
the strong ones,
the abuser.
Yeah, and so in fact, the enforcement of strength from the perpetrator is because that's all they've got. That's all they've got, is to try and control you. But the minute that you actually do realize or recognize your own strength, which is usually afterwards, and you can see it for what it is, you were keeping everything together. You were keeping the house and everything together. And so when you talk about your story of the I did this, I did that, it doesn't surprise me. I think a lot of women, or the abused, when they get out of it, are actually a lot stronger than what they perhaps give themselves credit for.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. So I really quickly, I got a house, but he was still actually trying to abuse me, even though I wasn't there anymore. You know, he still had connections to the children, and obviously, I had no evidence of the abuse, which was really, really difficult to get, because obviously everyone was like, don't ring social services, don't report this, don't do that, they'll take your kids away, which is, I honestly, when I hear people say that, it makes my blood boil, because I'm like, no, these services are here to help you. You know, use these services. They are there to help. And I know we hear horror stories. I know there are a few, but times are changing and things are different. And if I had have actually used these services, I would have been able to keep myself and my children safer going forward from such an abuser, had I have not listened to the scaremongering about getting help from these services. And it was the same with the Women's Centre, and because it was about domestic violence and abuse and all this, I thought they would see it that I'd failed. You know, I'd failed as a mum to keep my children safe because I'd been with somebody who was abusive.
Do you think that's because of how you were judging yourself? You thought that maybe they were going to judge you the way that you were really feeling perhaps about yourself?
Yeah, I totally do now. I feel that,
yeah.
But at the time,
yeah,
you know, these people were going to take my children away.
Yeah.
And it was just, that wasn't the case. You know, it really wasn't the case. So I didn't get any help at all. I sorted myself out. And then after about a couple of years, I had my first real mental break. I broke, I completely shut down, because he was continuing abuse and stuff. And then I realized, actually, you probably haven't processed. You haven't had the help you need. You haven't gone to these people. And it started off with something as simple as CBT for my OCD. And that led to me to, my CBT counsellor spoke to me a little bit. And he went, do you know, you might benefit from the Women's Centre. And he gave me all these contacts and numbers and said, just ring them, see what they can do, you know, just have a chat with them, they'll be fine. And I got this lovely woman. She was absolutely wonderful. She had hair like yours, Donna. It was amazing, this massive, her hair was as big as her personality. It was fantastic. And she was just a beautiful, beautiful lady. And she was like, you're so strong. And it was just fantastic. It was really, really beneficial to me. And that really cemented for me that I was on the right path. And then I managed to claim my name as my own, you know, and I really started down that journey. And that was 9 years ago now. I think it's 9 years ago that I became Claire Marie permanently and a force to be reckoned with.
I love it. And how long have you been with your current, tell us a bit about your relationship that you're in now?
So we've been together 5.5 years. We got engaged in our 5th anniversary. So that was just in February this year. It was quite funny because we'd known each other prior, well, not really. I knew his sister-in-law, and he'd met me in a club because we partied in the same town, kind of thing. But we didn't really start talking. I thought he was very innocent, you know, and that I'd eat him alive and things, and he wouldn't be able to cope with the force of nature that I am. And it wasn't until five and a half years ago, when someone said, "Oh, she'd eat you alive," you went, "Well, isn't that the point?" And then I was like, "He's ready, yay!" And so I invited him over, but I was still a bit about the whole relationship thing. So I invited him over, and I invited him as my unvalentine, and he just never left. That was it. He just he's just been in my life ever since. And so he proposed on the 14th of February this year, and hopefully we will be married on the 14th of February in the future. So that is very exciting for us. But he bless him, has had to deal with not only, you know, getting to know a new person and learning a relationship. We also had a child together. You know, there's been a lot of learning in this 5 years for both of us that we had to adapt to. And it must have been really difficult for him because he has had to deal with me not being able to talk about finances very well. You know, and it takes him sitting down and going, "What is this? Write it down." And I can write it down. I've got no problem with that. But he's had to learn that. You know, he's had to learn that I can't physically just go, "Oh, it's this amount." You know, I physically write it down for him. And, you know, it's taken a long time for us to get to the point where when one of us can't do something or can't say something, or, you know, I'm scared of certain things or whatever, triggers and things, or reminders, it's taken us a while to kind of get to that point where we're like, right, you're tizzing out about this, I will leave you to it for 5 minutes, come back, we'll sit and chat and talk about what's gone on. You know, a lot of that's happened to really help. So he's been really a powerful kind of support for me in my life, and I don't think I could cope without him.
I love that. And I think for me, my relationship that I'm in now, I met him quite soon after the abusive relationship. And when you're able to look at it from afar, especially as years go by, you can see. I don't know if you can agree with me, but you can start to see that it all kind of makes sense in a way. Not that they should have done that and it was right what they did, but for you and the path and the learnings and the experiences, and then what you can bring and help with other people. Do you know what I mean? Like getting in touch with yourself. I think when you can stand back and look at it, because I met my now husband quite soon after, but if I'm honest, I was a mess.
Yeah,
a real mess. But I was very honest. I was an honest mess. So I told him a lot. Yeah.
I think that's the thing. I think being honest, and the first couple of months when I freaked out over certain things, I wasn't very honest with him, you know, because I was in that kind of, oh, it's a new relationship, he doesn't want to know that I'm a nut job, you know, kind of thing, was still there. But actually, Phil was still trying to abuse me when me and Chris actually met. He was doing weird things even when we first got together, which was just bizarre. He actually didn't stop trying to get me or get to me until I was pregnant with Aurora, my daughter, who's Chris's child. And that was when I was 26. So he was still playing games and trying to manipulate and do things and playing games with the kids and everything until I was 26 years old. And he kind of, I think seeing the bump kind of made him go, oh, I've definitely lost her now. She's not mine anymore. But it was still going on when I was 26 years old. And that wasn't really helpful. You know, he was doing weird things like coming around my house and moving my wheelie bins around while I was out. My neighbour,
He liked to move things around, didn't he?
oh yeah, it was proper weird like that. Plant pots and stuff. You know, like in your garden, you have plant pots set out in a certain way, and they just stay there forever, don't they? Because that's where the plant pot is. You don't go around moving them every week, do you? And wheelie bins, for example, I had 2 wheelie bins, and because Jonathan was still in nappies, I had the black one kind of by the door, so when it was raining I could just flip it up and wang the nappy in, as you do. And the green one was across the garden, because if it was raining I could take the cardboard out later. It wasn't going to affect me. So I had it set up that way, and I'd come back, and one day I went to throw a nappy or a bag out, it might have been a bin bag or whatever, and I lifted up the bin lid and I was like, that's green, what's going on? I was like, what? And then the black one was all the way across the garden. I was like, oh my God. So then I went and had to swap them round. And then my plant pots, I had these giant teacup dotty plant pots. They were growing some pansies and herbs and a sunflower that the kids had planted. And I had a pink one for me, a green one and a blue one, because they were the colours that we'd all picked, and we all had our little plant pots, and they kept moving around like where they were and whose was whose. And I was like, why are they moving? Why are they moving? Who's doing that? And then we had a gnome, a like garden gnome. This gnome kept moving around the blooming garden. I was like, someone is freaking me out. What is going on? There was loads of jokes about I had a gnome ghost, you know, lots of gnome ghost jokes going on. And I remember watching a film with my best friend at the time, like a really close friend of mine, and the gnome, we were in the middle of a film and I went to close the curtains and the gnome was in the window. So he'd actually been round and moved this gnome while I was in the house. And oh, it was awful, awful. And then I lived next door to this old lady, and she was a lovely old lady, but she was really funny. She was just she was a widow. Her husband had died, and she used to smoke a lot. She's very funny. She was like my stoner grandma next door. And she came round. She says, "Oh, Claire Marie, I've got this doohickey on my phone, look." And I thought, what's she on about? And she'd actually record. She said, look at this. I thought I was going nuts that there was somebody in your garden. I thought I was hallucinating. She thought she'd smoked that much. She was that high that she'd hallucinated someone coming in my garden and moving my plant pots. And she'd recorded it to make sure it was real.
Wow. And it was him.
And it was him. And then, so I got the police involved, obviously, when I had the evidence. They came, kind of went, we'll have a word with him, sort it out, kind of stuff. And then he stopped kind of coming around the house. And then he didn't see me or the kids for ages, years and years. And then I was going to move down to Wales, and he found that out through the grapevine, and that wasn't acceptable to him. So he completely started getting back involved, got the courts involved, was trying to get me to do all sorts of stuff, like change custody and things like that. And the courts weren't having any of it. They were just like, no, you know, the judge was trying to be amicable, like, oh, well, how about you have them every other weekend and then you have them on a Wednesday, because he wanted every weekend so that we couldn't, you know, go places basically. And the judge was like, you can't have them every weekend, are you insane? No, you can have them every other weekend and maybe Wednesday, and then you can drop them at school. And he turned around to the judge and went, drop them at school? What do I look like? A bus service? I'm not dropping them at school. She can come pick them up and drop them off. And the judge at that point just went, So you can have them every other weekend and it'll stay as that.
And
You
is
know?
that something that continued, or do you still see him then?
It got to the point where he was coming round, being abusive on the doorstep, swearing, throwing stuff, smashing things, slamming my garden gate off its hinges, braying on my door, threatening to throw bricks at the window. We had to get the police to remove him from the property several times. So actually we have a safe point of contact, a joint house where I drop the kids off half an hour before and he comes half an hour after, so that I actually have nothing to do with him personally. Anything that needs to be communicated is written down. Not that he ever communicates anything with me, you know.
It's good. It's good to know that. It's good to know that that option is there. So anyone that's listening,
anyone could do that. And the thing is, as well, if you, you know, say that to a judge or anything like that, because he tried to stop me doing that, and I explained to the judge what had been going on. And I said, I want a safe point of contact because it's not fair for the children to witness this behavior over and over again. And the judge was like, right, he said, you need to give me 3 like options and then he can pick the option which is best for him. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. So actually we negotiated a very safe place, where the kids felt safe, where I felt safe, where he felt he could come pick them up. And we continued like that. But actually, even now, you know, he's very flaky. He hasn't contacted his kids in 5 months. So because they said in initial lockdown of COVID, he said, are you coming over? And they said, oh no, it's lockdown, we're going to stay at home for a few weeks. And he's just not contacted them since. So he doesn't really make contact with them, and he doesn't make effort with them. He just kind of, whenever he thinks that he can win one over me, it's like a game to him. Whenever he thinks he can do something that'll upset me, he then will use the kids as a tool. But actually now he's realized that it doesn't affect me. I don't see him, I don't care, you know, I've got no thing about him anymore.
It's when they know they've got that power over you, isn't it? So when they've got that power over you, that's when they're in control. The minute you can let go of that and you start getting that power back yourself, and you're taking the power from them. So exactly. That's what you want the women to, and men.
And he was using the kids as his power tool, you know. And actually, once I said, actually, the kids can make up their own mind. They can make their own decisions. That's fine. Whatever. There's a safe house. Let the kids decide. He realised right then, you know, and I was pregnant with Aurora at that time. So it both kind of collided at the same time. He just kind of went, oh, and the effort then dropped off. And he just stopped making any kind of effort with the kids. But when I was angry, because obviously when it was first broken up and he was trying this power play and stuff, I was getting angry and upset and trying to go, but you're not listening, he's unfair. When I stopped trying to explain my side, and I just went, oh, whatever. When I let go of any kind of negative emotion towards it and kind of went, can I do anything about this? No. Is there anything else I can do? No, you know, no, I've done everything I can. I can't do any more. Right, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. Just box that off, leave it. As soon as I did that in my own head and just didn't care anymore about how he affected, you know, he's nothing to do with me now. You know, it's up to him to build that relationship with his child if he wants to, if the child wants to. As soon as I got to that point where I was freed from any kind of emotional control towards him, even though it was through my children, as soon as I let go of that, he had nothing on me, and he realized, and it was the breathing point I needed, you know, it's a breaking point that I needed. And as soon as I stopped fighting and just kind of went, right, let's see where everything kind of went and let's just move on with life, he actually realized he'd lost his little game, whatever he was playing. and he lost all his power. And he actually now, I don't hear a pip from him. He comes whenever he texts the kids. But the kids often text him saying they're not going. They don't have contact with him very often. And he's now not a big figure in either mine or the kids' life. So
I'm really glad you did mention that and you brought all that up, because a lot of women, abused women, may have lots of children. And certainly one way of controlling women is to keep getting them pregnant, so that you've got more and more reason to need or for it to be seen that you need
he
this
actually
person there.
he
So
actually
it's really,
wanted
yeah,
to
really
get
good.
me pregnant when I started to take back control when I was 19. He actually suggested a third child to me.
Of course.
And I kind of went, no. But, you know, some people would have really, yeah.
I didn't have children, thankfully, when I left my abuser, and but I did have. I touched on it a little bit, and I want to touch on this now, and then just open up the conversation to the light, the end, not the end, the beginning almost.
Yeah.
But for me, finding out that my birth mum, I was 21 years old, so I'd been in an abusive relationship for 5 years, and I couldn't get out. I couldn't get out of it. I was scared, and I'd kind of given up inside. But finding out about my birth mum's history and what she'd gone through, and actually her death, probably suicide, was because of domestic violence. It was just like, oh my God, I could see, even without being brought up by my birth mum, I was in this cycle. Without even knowing the woman, I was going down the exact same road as her. And to see that and have this social worker explain to me, sitting there reading it all out to me, it was just boom. And I remember, I knew then, Claire Marie, that I was not going to be in this anymore. This was it. And it was something that, it wasn't in here, it was in here. It was like, it was an inner knowing that I am not continuing this anymore. And I had fire in my belly that went home. I called the landlord. I arranged for him to come and give me the deposit. I remember standing on the iron mark on the carpet while he came in, so he didn't see it. So I got all my deposit. I remember my boyfriend abuser coming in, and me having the courage and the guts to stand right up close to him and tell him, I'm going, I'm leaving. And you know what? I think he must have seen this aura, this strength, because he didn't. Before, he would have been like, you're not going anywhere. He didn't. He didn't. I didn't tell him about
completely
money or anything. It's just strength. Yeah.
Exactly. It's completely different. Once you have made up your mind, you see, I had made that decision for me. I wasn't going to let him have me anymore. But I hadn't made that decision about the kids kind of thing. I was still playing along without realizing to his silly, childish game he was playing with the children. And I really wish, although I was only 19, you know, so some people would argue I was still a child myself at 19. But yeah, so I'd kind of not realized I needed to make that decision for my entire family. And I don't mean not to see the kids, you know, although that would have been preferential. But they have eventually seen what he is like themselves. I don't talk badly about him to them. You know, I never mention him to them. You know, I might say, oh yeah, we went on holiday with your dad here or blah, 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 but never do I bring up what their dad do. And I see so many mums who go, oh, well, your dad's an abuser. And the thing is, children don't need that. You know, I knew my dad was an abuser, but it took me till I was older to go, yeah, no, I'm done with him. You know, I still kind of had that relationship, and I think every child does. And I think it's very important to let your child make that decision for themselves. But you have to say to yourself, I am not in charge of their relationship anymore. And you have to actually divorce their relationship, as it were, because you obviously be there to guide your child and support your child. And obviously, if something bad is happening, be there for your child. That's very important. Yours and your child's relationship is completely different. But always be thinking, be team kid. You know, don't be team mum's better than dad. Don't be team dad's better than mum. Don't be team let's use the children as a pawn. You know, be team kid. And once I went, is enough. I am team kid. Whatever my kids need, that's what we're going to do. You know, if they need a safe space where he's not going to shout at me and call me all the names under the sun, then that's what we'll do. If they need a phone so that he can ring them if he needs to, or they can contact him, that's what they'll get, so that they can form those relationships safely and securely. But I still have my children come to me and say, I want to tell my dad I don't want to go this weekend. And actually, I have to sit there with them and help them to write their text. I don't put words in their mouth and say, how would I say that? And I said, oh, well, you could say, you know, be honest, tell them what you're doing, tell them why, and, you know, but say, I'll see you next time, you know, if you don't want to upset them. And that still has to happen, because they themselves, they feel the wrath of that abuse. And I have to give them the tools to be able to kind of experience it safely, if that makes sense. They've still got that relationship with their dad. The courts have deemed that they still have to have that relationship. That's fair enough, but they have to do it in a safe manner. And they come to me because they're scared of how he will react. So it's evident it's still there in their minds, but I just have to support them like a best friend would when you're going through that. You know, you had friends, I had friends who supported us and helped us through, and we have to be there to do that for our child and stop being in the relationship. You can't be in it. You have to divorce it and be separate, I think. And once you do that, they lose absolutely all control over you and your life, and they can be in the kid's life. They can have a relationship with the child, and if they don't put the right effort in or behave in the correct manner with the child, you're there to support and protect your child the way that you should be, but the child can see for themselves and make their strong self decisions, and not need someone to come in and try take over for them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to really talk now to women that are listening, that are in an abusive relationship, perhaps with children or not, as the case may be. And I certainly know from the work that I have done that a lot of women are like, oh, they've almost given up that there's any good men out there. And I look at my story, and I did meet my now husband very quickly afterwards, actually. But for me, there was something deep inside that knew that I wasn't going to put up with this again. And I also knew that the guys that would be coming up to you on the street going, hello darling, you all right? Or, you know, the guys in the club that would come dancing up, they weren't the men that I was interested in. You know, they're the ones, the cocky charmers, that I thought, actually, I'm keeping away from you. It was the quiet ones that and you know, I did put my now husband through quite a lot of hell, actually, because of my own baggage. But
I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's not about choosing to stay away from a certain type of person. You know, abusers can come in any shape or form. It's about trusting your instinct with that. You knew that cocky guy coming up saying, all right, darling, get me a drink. You know, he was already in that first instant telling you what to do. You didn't want that. You'd decided, you'd made that decision. And the thing is, you can't expect someone else to follow your boundaries if you haven't set your boundaries. So it's about learning your boundaries. What will you accept? What won't you accept? What is acceptable? What isn't acceptable? Once you know that, instantly people around you will know it.
So I sort of asked the question a bit earlier, but then I went off onto a tangent. So is there anything that you would say to women, men that are on the receiving end of abuse, domestic abuse, violence, and they're in it, and you know what it feels like to be in it. I know what it feels like to be in it, and it's taken certain situations to kind of give us the strength to get out. But is there anything you can say that might help move?
I don't know. I don't know if it will help, or if, because it's very difficult when you're in that situation to even believe that it's not normal, or that it's not acceptable, and that not everyone deals with this, but it is true that somewhere deep inside of you, that isn't normal. You are stronger. You deserve more, and you are enough. You don't need somebody to hurt you. You don't need somebody to control you. You are enough. You don't need someone to be there for you, because they're not there already. If they're doing that to you, they are not there for you. You are lying to yourself. And you just have to remember that you are enough. Do whatever it takes to get out, to feel your freedom. And if you can just pick up a bag and leave, just get out however you can. Ring people secretly. Don't lie. Don't hide. The best thing I did was be honest about what I was feeling, because people then or what I was experiencing, because people would say to me, no, that's not normal. No. And your abuser generally tells you to lie. They make it your fault. They tell you lies. They expect you to lie. They expect you to cover up. If someone is asking you to lie for them, they don't care about you. There should be no lies in any relationship. And if someone is telling you you have to lie to present your relationship to somebody, at that point, you need to leave, because lying is not going to help.
Thank you. And there's such an element of searching for your own truth in all of this, isn't there? I think for me, it was a start of my journey, thankfully, quite early on, 20 odd years ago, going there, experiencing that. I think sometimes we can take all these negative situations and just, they can depress us even more. But how about we enable these situations to make us stronger than because of what's happened? So sort of to give us that strength to move forward, because we've been given an opportunity to search deeper within ourselves because of it. If everything was just plain sailing all the time, we'd have no reason to search deep down and understand ourselves.
I often say to people, without the downs, how can you understand when you're having a high? How can you understand when you're doing something fantastic? Highs and lows. Life is a roller coaster. You have ups and downs, but a roller coaster just doesn't keep going down and down, down and down, down. You know, it's gonna go up, but sometimes you have to take the reins and make it go up. And that first step is always the hardest, but you survived yesterday and you survived the day before. So survive today and take that first step. Be strong enough and just do it. And every day should be the start of your new tomorrow. You know, it's not, don't hold on to this, oh, well, this is what my life is. No, it's not. Your life is whatever you want it to be. So start with that first step. You don't have to, you know, do everything all in one day. Nobody's got it all mapped out, ready to go. Everything's going to change and flow, but you just need to take that first step, and every day can just be one step a day, but just keep going forward.
And there really is so much more support out there now than there ever was. The refuges, you can turn up with nothing, yourself, your children, and nothing else. In fact, a lot of the refuges are expecting you to do that, because the opportunity to leave is about just leaving yourself and just getting out. So don't ever think that, oh, I can't because I've got to get this, I've got to get that. No, there is support. They are, sadly, we're going through this lockdown period, there's more cases, but that should not be the reason why you don't call. I'm going to leave a number now before I forget. There's a number, this is certainly for here in the UK, which is a national domestic abuse helpline, which is 0808 2000 247, 0808 2000 247. And I know people will be listening, not just here in the UK, so I'm going to leave the numbers for other countries or wherever in the notes, in the comments, because it's really important that you make that step. And the support in these refuges, like the Freedom Programme, you've talked about, you know, there's just so much emotional support from the minute you get there, for yourself and for your children, which wasn't there 30 years ago.
It wasn't.
It shouldn't be a problem, but it is, and there's a support out there for it. So go on.
And I think the other thing as well is maybe link the websites where you can see if, you know, what you're suffering is domestic violence. There are some websites out there, because some people, their abusers actually tell them so much that they're not being abused that they believe it. Well, if you're in any doubt, you should definitely go check one of these websites out and see if actually it is abuse, because there's lots of different types of abuse that can be swept under the rug as you being oversensitive or.
Do you know any of those websites offhand, or I mean, I can always get it off you and then leave it in the comments maybe.
There's one about gaslighting, which is where people tell you, oh no, you're just being sensitive. Oh no, I was joking, it was a joke. You know, that the gaslighting is quite a serious thing that people do in relationships, especially. And there is one about, am I feeling gaslighted, but I can't remember it. But I'll definitely try and look them up for you, Donna.
Yeah. And to sort of towards the end now, there are some good men out there and women. There are some good partners out there. You can have a good relationship. You can talk and compromise and share your problems. And I think it comes down to believing in that you are worth it yourself. So all of these women that are saying, oh, there's no men out there, they're still feeling the wounds of the pain. Yeah.
Actually, told a lady this the other day, and I said, all you have to remember is you are worth your equal. And I think in all men and women, you're going to find somebody who is your equal. You get each other, you laugh about the same things, you joke, you understand each other. You might not have had the same experiences as each other, you might not have had the same upbringing, but you get each other, and just accept nothing less than that. You know, if it doesn't feel like you're an equal adult to this person, then leave. You know, don't even enter into it. That's the whole dating process, isn't it? You know, feel equal, take your time, get to know somebody. Don't just go, oh, all right, this is the first man that looked in my direction, or first woman that looked in my direction, so I'll get with them. You know, God, there could be a serial killer, for God's sake. I
think you need to be looking in your own direction. I'm actually going to bring this podcast for the third time, episode 3, or certainly the third guest, back to mirror work, because you look at yourself and actually fall in love with yourself first, and believe in yourself first, believe that you are good enough, you are worth it, and then you'll start looking into other people's eyes after you've done that.
And I think that's exactly right, Donna. I think once you love yourself, you know what you expect to be loved in return, and you know what love you're going to give someone, because the love you give yourself is actually the hardest kind of love that you could give. So if you can give that to yourself, that's what you're going to give to someone else. But it's also, if you're loving yourself at this level, you're not going to accept someone else loving you at this level. You know, it's going to be equal. And that's exactly what I meant. Yeah, you're right, it is mirror work.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm just going to end now on some of the angel cards that were drawn earlier before we started the interview. So one particular card that came up that really struck us both as being quite poignant with this is the guardian angel of young adults. So young adults, I think we've got to keep our eyes and ears open for young adults that are so impressionable and maybe feeling very insecure, looking for that love. Let's keep our eyes and ears and hearts and minds wide open for our young adults. Yeah,
100%.
The overall card was Gabriel, and the archangel, and he can help us to express our truth openly and honestly, respect and honor our individuality, and listen to our intuition and inner voice. I think we kind of touched on all of that, haven't we, in this? I've always said, follow that first gut instinct before your mind kicks in and starts saying, oh no, you can't do that. Just follow, or just connect to that first feeling.
Definitely.
Because I think that first feeling, some will say it's from the heart. No, it's not. My heart's broken. Some will say it's whatever, wherever. That first feeling, follow that. Yeah,
definitely, just grab it and go, because it's just,
and the more you do it like yourself, you're quite confident with it now, with listening to yourself. It's all bound with this being in touch with who you really are.
And some people still don't like that I'm like that. Some people will still try to put me down because I'm like, oh no, instinctually I shouldn't do this. Yeah, I should do this. No, yeah, no. And I make decisions now like boom, 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 boom. And people actually try to put me down for that. And I'm like, why? Because you don't trust yourself as much as I trust myself. And it spins it back round on them, because it's their insecurity that they're judging, not yours. And it's them they're questioning through you. And it's a completely different thing. And once you realize that power, nobody else can ever control you, ever.
Oh, that's lovely. I really like that. And I think as well for you, and certainly for me, the fact that we did connect very quickly. I mean, there's lots of entertainers in our company that we work with, but you and I connected very quickly. I think what you've just said there, how you are with your journey on yourself, then the frequency with other people you attract. I'm finding that my on the one hand, friends like that, really, I've got lots of people, but we're kind of on the same frequency, so we don't have that going on that you've just said there, because we all are. And I love how the more you get in touch with yourself, the more you tap into this and start believing it, the more like-minded people start getting in there. And I reckon they're all going to be doing podcasts with me, because it's like they're helping me find my truth. So let's explore yours and help everyone else search for theirs and find theirs in the process. I mean, it's just wonderful. Love it.
I think that's exactly it. And I think once you have that confidence, just trust yourself a little bit. All those voices which are negative and trying to bring you down, because they're still there. Don't get me wrong, they're still there. But I don't hear them anymore, because that's nothing to me. I'm over here with my tribe, having a great life, loving things, living the dream, you know. And it doesn't mean I need a fancy car or a fancy house. It means I'm around the right people for me, and I'm enjoying that. And I just don't need to listen to that. You know, that's nothing to me. They can carry on over there.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a nasty thing. It's just a detachment, isn't it? You get on with that. I know, and it's fine. And I think that's another sign of finding your own truth, because you are now able to detach and just observe. I mean, not always. Some people do grind you and grate you, don't they? I mean, I know they do with me. Sometimes I find it really hard, but to keep my mouth shut. But a lot of the times I'm learning to just, okay, yeah, all right. It's an ongoing thing, isn't it?
And sometimes it still catches me off now. I've been working on this since I was like 20 years old. So that's 11 years. 11 years I've been working on this. And sometimes still someone can come into my little area. I'm like, go, and I'm like, how did that happen? And I still and then I like go, okay, this is just another lesson to learn from. Box it off, learn the lesson, off you go. But it's much quicker now. You know, 11 years ago, it used to take me months, years to work out what I should be doing with that situation. And now it's a matter of 10, 15 minutes where I've gone, what happened there? How did that go off? How did that happen? Oh, right, okay, dealt with. And that's because I use all the past lessons as my tools to make sure I keep it down. And those things hardly happen to me now.
Yeah. Claire Marie, thank you so much for being such a fabulous guest. It really has. We've searched for it. We've gone in there. We've looked at it. I think we've done a good job at really looking at this, and hopefully people listening are going to take something away from it. And if they are in a situation that they know instinctively is not right, hopefully this will give them that push to leave.
I hope so. I hope even if it only helps one person out there struggling, that it's more than worth any amount of time that I've given today. So I'm really grateful that you asked me, and I'm really honoured to help you with this.
Oh, thank you. Claire Marie, I'll let you get on and do your puddle splashing or whatever it is you're off to do with your 4-year-old with Aurora.
Yeah, we're off to go find some giant puddles. It's been raining, so we're off to go get our wellies on and do some giant puddle splashing, because why not?
Okay, lovely. All right, well, thank you. Mwah.
Bye, beautiful.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode on domestic abuse. It went quite deep for myself and Claire Marie in some cases, but this was not edited very much at all. So you really did kind of get everything from that episode. The only bit that really was cut was where we started talking about young adults, and we realised that that was a podcast in its own right. But as far as domestic abuse, myself and Claire Marie, we really did search for it. We explored it. And I think between us, we've gotten rid of some negative emotions that we perhaps didn't know were there beforehand. And that is what my mission is with Searching for Truth, whether it be exploring my truth or exploring your truth. So I'll be back next week with another episode and another guest. So until then, have a great week.